All right, so what I really wanted to talk about to start this segment off with today was the topic that we're going to talk about now, or at least until I get shut down on this topic, as opposed to Valentine's Day. So, what I really wanted to talk to you about was Megan Hall, Laverne, Tennessee.
You want to talk about this?
Isn't that on like the national topic of things to talk about right now?
I think a Chinese spy balloon
Well, yeah,
has
but there's
been.
there's nothing romantic about a Chinese spy balloon. There's nothing relationship wise about a Chinese spy balloon. Oh yeah, it's great. You ought to see the look on her face because she thinks I'm going to go down this rabbit hole where I'm really not.
No, I think that, well, cops and dispatchers and nurses and doctors and everyone that's in a profession that has an opinion about this story. Um, I don't know what people outside of those professions, I don't know what those people think about it.
All
But
right.
you're going to tell them.
So she said, has an opinion of this story. The real question is, I guess, as you're listening to our podcast and you hear Megan Hall
Podcast.
podcast, if you
Podcast.
listen to our podcast and listen to Megan, that was a diction error. I told you I promised I would make those things better, but that listens to this podcast and heard me say the topic that I really wanted to discuss, and it was so exciting because I worked on it for a few days this week because I thought maybe it would, inspire some really cool conversations. Um, it's odd. She keeps looking at production stuff. Sorry, she interrupted me again. She gives me
No,
speed up. She looks at the little bars. It's like, ooh, look, a squirrel. She looks at the
no.
volume
I'm looking
bars,
at your
sees
paper
them move up, and then she
because
looks at the
he
paper
didn't
and
tell me he wanted to talk about this.
right,
So
I
that's
didn't because I really wanted it to be
that's off the
spontaneous and
cuff.
off the cuff. Exactly.
Okay.
Like
All
that's
right.
why I
Great.
said, "Hey, what do you
Okay.
want to talk about?" And you
All
talked
right. If
about
you want to
Valentine's
talk
Day.
about it. Let's go.
So we wanted to talk a little bit, or I wanted to talk a little bit about Megan Hall and Little Laverne Police Department. So the question I have for any of you that are listening is: does any of you know what I'm talking about? If not, let me tell you. The headline that I read last week, and it was fascinating because I can't believe I missed this. We both are somewhat avid readers, and I think you have to understand from where we came from. Police, fire, emergency management services, dispatching, that kind of stuff. I've told people for years that don't understand the background that it's 95% boredom followed by about 5% sheer terror, something along those
Yeah.
lines.
Dispatch the same way.
So we're all kind of in the same boat. At
We're
95%,
news
thank
junkies.
you.
We're adrenaline junkies. Just like I left dispatch in July, but my favorite program on the weekends to watch is On Patrol Live, the old Live PD, which was on fire this weekend because
Oh
it's
my
a
God.
full
Yes, it
moon.
is. It's a full
It's a
moon.
full
It's a
moon.
3 day full moon
Some
phase.
guy took a poop on television completely naked in the desert. All right, that's all I'm going to say about that. But if you ever, I mean, this weekend, sometimes the shows are boring. Traffic stops are boring, just constant same thing all the time. But this weekend, and especially in our town too, because the Beach Grove Walmart was on the national news because two women got in this huge fight years ago at the Walmart. And so that Walmart was, Beach Grove PD is uh, on Patrol Live, and they started the night at that Walmart with a problem, a stolen car in the parking lot, a stolen U-Haul truck at that. And then while they're there, there's some
Can
resistor
I
that's a
clarify that for those people that
shoplifter.
haven't seen it? We're not talking the U-Haul box truck. We're
No,
talking
this
the
was a this was
1995
a
pickup truck,
right
1995 a day pickup truck.
right. This was they probably can't go get a vehicle, so they went to U-Haul and rented a truck. Which I didn't realize that. I mean, I can understand renting a truck to transport stuff, but I didn't really think about the fact that you would keep a truck like that as your transportation. But if you weren't able to get transportation or a vehicle any other way, then that makes sense.
So they rented the vehicle to use as their
Everyday vehicle.
like
That's why they had it.
enterprise rental
Yes.
vehicle
Yes, that's what they did.
for 1995 a day.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you get a discount if you keep it
You got to be
longer.
transporting a whole lot more than just two people in a U-Haul rental pickup truck.
Right, but like I said, I think this was the like they weren't able to get a vehicle anyway any other way, and because be honest with you, they weren't the most probably fine upstanding citizens. I think there were some. I'm trying to think if they let him go. They didn't have warrants, or they didn't get arrested. I think I know they towed the truck, and I think they let them go. But in this case, if you know anything about that stuff, it just means unauthorized control of the vehicle. They didn't bring it back. Which the guy, of course, is saying, I made the payment. I made the payment. That's what he's telling the police officer. And then, the officer's like, oh, well, that's not what U-Haul says. So,
All right, so I had to explain
sorry.
I had to explain to our listeners again. She hijacked the topic to talk about one that actually pertains to her more, or makes her laugh and brings joy to her life a lot more than it does me. There's a reason for that, and it's because Cindy's always had this wannabe police mentality from behind the microphone of dispatch. When most cops like me, I'll watch the show with her from time to time, but it just, after a while, it's annoying because I lived that for so long. Like,
Right.
it's no different than any of the crap I've ever seen before in my
Right.
entire life.
Right.
Now, the crapper in the the Nevada episode, in the middle of the desert, that one was different. I've not had that occur in my life.
Well, that's exactly what the guy said. I mean, the officer, oh my gosh, it was so funny what he said. I mean, it was awesome. So, I mean, so yes, wannabe, whatever. I was a reserve officer for a little while because I thought I wanted to be a full-time officer, and that is absolutely not the case. I don't want to touch dirty, nasty people, and I don't want to fight. So that doesn't make a good police officer. So that I had already gone the other route. I stuck with dispatch, and I would say that most of my coworkers and people that I worked with on the street, firemen, policemen, respected the knowledge I had that I brought to dispatch from, 5 years of, going through a academy and stuff like that. So I think that was good knowledge, and it was good to have, and it made me a better dispatcher altogether. I was not made to be a police officer, so I didn't go that route.
I got to tell you, at one point when she said, I don't want to be involved in fights, we made eye contact, and it was the most pleading eye contact we've made in a long time, where she was like, please don't say it.
Right, I can't take a punch. It's okay. It's all right. I'm afraid. I'll admit it. I can't take a punch.
She beat me to it. She cannot.
I cannot take a punch.
And the reason we know that is as much as I pick on her about being a wannabe cop, and as much as a full-time police officer will pick on reserves and/or what they call civilian volunteer police, about being wannabes, our relationship being what it is, I tried to help her. We worked out together quite a bit.
And by helping, he means taking a swipe at me and seeing what happens when I do that.
Well, eventually it's going to come down to some perp on the streets going to take
Exactly.
a swing at you.
So he did me a solid. He did me a favor, basically. So we've determined. I mean, that all played into
when she
it.
Says I can't take
that
a
all
punch,
played into it.
She can actually take a punch. There's a difference in that. Now, don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, I could have.
Don't get me wrong.
I can't give a punch.
I've hit her in training scenarios, stuff like that. But we've never had a physical violence thing where we didn't get along type. Fight.
No.
So I want to clarify that. I don't want you to think I'm bouncing her off the walls here at home and anywhere else that we've been the last 27 years. But part of the training is that we both needed to be comfortable with whether or not she could defend herself. Cindy's tough. She's strong. She can take a punch. It's not that. The problem that Cindy has is that if you swing at her head, she closes her eyes.
That's a problem.
It's a major problem.
But see here, so here's another thing we've talked about for years. I have a sister. I have no brothers. I didn't grow up with boys rumble, tumble, fighting, biting, doing all the things that boys do. I didn't grow up like that. So have I been in a fist fight? I still have never been in a fist fight. I've never.
Never?
No.
Not once?
No.
You've never had some wild cat girl on girl fist fight type thing?
No, I have not.
Mud wrestling?
Well, I think it's very obvious that I don't like to fight.
Jello wrestling?
No.
Anything
Negative.
like that?
Nothing.
Oh, I am so disappointed. I
Nothing.
did not know that about you.
Nothing.
I always envisioned you in like a mud pit when we were younger. All right, let's get this back on track since you took it off track once again. She would rather talk about a guy pooping in the desert than the topic that I'm about to bring up, which is the Meagan Hall incident. The headline read, "Cops Gone Wild, Meagan Hall gives an eye-watering account of her sordid romps with fellow officers."
Eye-watering? What does that mean?
Eye-watering in the headline.
That doesn't even make any sense.
In interview transcripts obtained exclusively by the Daily Mail. Hall's 61-page confession covers everything from games of Strip Uno. Who plays Strip Uno?
I have no idea.
Have you ever heard of Strip Uno?
Well, I mean, that's just a game of Uno that they changed the rules.
You lose, you take off a piece of clothing?
I'm guessing yes.
Well, isn't strip poker then? I don't know. Maybe that's
I couldn't play strip poker. Terrible at cards.
Everything from games of Strip Uno, to foot fetish photos and wife swapping sessions with randy police pals.
You need to explain. Okay, so what he's talking about is that transcript is a female police officer who was very familiar with multiple police officers on the police department, and it turned into locally for them. I mean, I don't think it's that big of a national story, but I'm sure it was a huge scandal in their little town in Tennessee. And what's interesting is we've heard of things like this happening in a large police department just west of us. Something happened like that. This little town we live in had a scandal that involved women and police officers, and so it happens.
It does happen, and those things happen in a lot of different relationships. So
in all kinds of professions too.
Right. So,
I mean, if you talk to a nurse or a doctor, those come to mind. I mean, that kind of stuff goes on in hospitals too. I mean, it's not just strictly law enforcement, or I mean, you could include the fire department in that too.
What's interesting about this to me is that she went down the road that I'm going to go down, and we did not have this conversation, nor has she seen my show prep notes that I took earlier this week. And I know she's thinking in her mind, you're going to love this. She's like, of course you did. Of course you took time to prep these things and to think about it. I try to think about whenever I'm having a conversation with somebody, where I think that conversation is going to go, or where I kind of want it to go, which is, again, another one of our goals here. I know she says I'm serious and I take things too seriously, and I'm kind of in teacher mode all the time, or helpful mode. But for me, that's the only way I know how to help people, is to explain some of the experiences that I have in kind of a teacher or instructor mode. Cindy's personality, you've already seen it, you've already heard it. Just in the first 2 episodes that we've had, she's much more spontaneous, much more off the cuff. But she's got depth, and that's one of the other things that makes our relationship work, is because there are times where I look at her and I think, what are you thinking about? Like puppy dogs and lollipops and rainbows.
Probably.
Just based on the innocent look in her face. And it turns out she doesn't. She thinks about other things as well, and she leads me towards other directions.
Aw, isn't that nice?
Yes, it does. It leads me towards the things that I want to talk about, which, in this world, the most important thing is the things that I want to talk about and the things that I want to do. And
whatever.
Not necessarily what she wants. So I did want to talk about that, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how relationships affect divorce rates and alcoholism and drug abuse, and we're going to move that into other conversations as we move down the road in this podcast, which is kind of interesting because she brought it up, and I really didn't think she was going to. But if you remember back a few minutes ago when I said, especially in law enforcement, fire service, emergency medical service, I would say probably emergency hospital workers, like the emergency department people, that kind of stuff, and dispatchers, because they're the front lines of everything. You can't get any of those services unless you call a dispatcher first, so you got to give dispatch credit. I always have. If you call for help, she's the first person you call.
We tell you where to go.
That's exactly right. They do.
Police officers.
But I said a few minutes ago that 95% of that work is relatively boring, because you're waiting for somebody to call you.
Yeah.
In your case. For me, I'm waiting for somebody to call her and have her discern whether or not I get called. When I got called as a police officer, my job was to come out and solve the problem, one way, shape, or form. I'm a problem solver, always have been, always will be. Completely different than a dispatch mindset. She solves problems, but she also determines what skill set is necessary to solve those problems. Whether it's a police officer, firefighter, medic, whatever. Helicopter to come to the scene, those types of things. So I said a minute ago, 95% of it's boredom, 5% of it's sheer terror. The problem with the boredom followed by sheer terror is in those boring moments, we have a lot of time to read, we have a lot of time to talk to each other, we have a lot of time to contemplate other avenues of how do I get out of this boredom. And apparently in Laverne, Tennessee, that young lady spent a lot of time figuring out how to use her Liam Neeson skill sets and,
Liam Neeson's skill set. What is that?
You've never heard of Liam Neeson?
Yeah, I know who he is, but what skill set are you talking about?
He had a very particular set of skills.
What?
Never mind. Way over your head.
I guess.
Does any of you know what the divorce rate is for, and it's a general category because I think somebody complained about this years ago, but the general category now is called protective services. It's got police, fire, emergency management, dispatch. It's all rolled into one. Let me ask Cindy. Do you have any idea what you think the divorce rate is for people that are in the air quote protective services?
I would guess at least 55%.
Oh, wow. You're way high. A little higher than I would have guessed. She said 55%. The actual number is 40% divorce rate.
Well, that's better than I thought. That's good.
However, I will tell our listening audience that if dispatching is your job, your divorce rate's even higher than that.
What is it?
46.6%.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know you could find stats that broke that out.
It does.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating technology. I've explained it to you before. It's called Google.
Shut up.
It is. It's called Google.
I have no reason to Google that.
Well, why not?
I don't care what the divorce rate is.
You should.
Well, now I know.
It's 46.
I don't have to Google it now.
Now you see why I work so hard at making you happy during Valentine's Day, a holiday that means absolutely nothing to me.
You're the 54%. We're the 54%. Is that right?
We are the 54%.
54, is that math right?
Well, 53 point.
Okay, whatever.
6.
But, okay, I got it close. But yes, we are. But those professions they're hard. I saw someone post, it was someone that, a coworker that I worked with before I left dispatch, and I saw him post the trauma bond is real. And I was like, that's interesting. Out of all the years, I don't think I've ever heard someone use the word trauma bond, but it is. So when you go through something obviously traumatic, take the call, that's a traumatic call, and then you send it to the police officer. The police officer handles the on-scene trauma. The medic handles the on-scene trauma. There's a bond, even though I don't talk to the fireman. I don't maybe not talk to the police officer afterwards. I mean, small dispatch centers, they probably do for something like that. They might even have a debrief happen if it's something that crazy. But dispatchers absolutely have those bonds, because I have several people that we went through just horrible things in the dispatch center itself, and then it was horrible on the outside too for those people. We know. I know it's hard to describe, but we just know.
Well, let me take a shot at describing it because, again, it's fascinating to me that you and I have not had this conversation. We haven't taken this to the next level of professionalism where I come up with a general theme and we do some pre-production work and we sit down and we talk about what we're going to do before. This has been off the cuff twice. And you went down the road that if you jumped down the rabbit hole that I went down, which was I researched the topic that she said she would never spend any time looking up on Google, the next logical step is you got to look at the trauma-induced problems that we often get as ways to cope or use as coping mechanisms to solve those problems.
Most of them are not good.
Two of the worst are drug and alcohol abuse.
Correct.
So I found a fascinating statistic. It does relate to relationships, but 1 in 4 police officers have a drug or alcohol problem.
That's not surprising.
I would imagine if I went down the hole even further that, those numbers probably carry over to the entire protective services career field.
Right.
1 in 4. So 25% of all police, fire, emergency management, and dispatch, and that's Cindy and Dave telling you that. I'm sure you'll go out and find those numbers to be slightly different. But 25% of us suffer from those types of problems that are induced more likely by the trauma that Cindy talked about just a second ago. I want to help define the trauma just a bit, and then we'll move off of that for a second. But I did, again, fascinating to me that this conversation can take place without either one of us scripting it, but I did find a pretty descriptive way of explaining the trauma that she's talking about. And it says police officers and other law enforcement officers grapple with high-stress work environments, emergency scenarios, and demanding work hours and schedules that make family or leisure time very difficult. They deal with crisis daily, sometimes at the risk of their own lives, that can lead to substance abuse as a means to cope or unwind. And then, of course, the statistic I'm telling you about came from this quote. 1 in 4 police officers has a problem with drug or alcohol. I want to talk a little bit about that and how that can affect relationships and some of the things that, we kind of alluded to Meagan Hall in Tennessee and a few other things. Let's talk a little bit about that.
What do you want to talk about? This girl, I can't even think of how to describe this. They were getting together. She was getting together with police. What are you talking about?
I don't think we have to go down that road. I think we've already covered
Then what are you talking about?
No, I want to talk about the experiences that we've had with that and some of the things that we've seen.
You mean trauma?
I don't mean the sexual experience.
Oh, like, holy crap.
I'm referring to
All
the
right,
trauma.
let's not go there.
And
That's a
how
totally different podcast.
It is. It's a totally different podcast.
Which we're not going to do.
Right now, we're considered G-rated.
That's right. We're going to keep it that way.
Yeah, so we want to keep it there for now.
Yeah.
We might expand into the X-rated version.
Absolutely not.
Later down the road.
Nope.
Might go from a pillow away to pillow talk.
Nope.
We're never going to go there?
No.
Okay. Well, doggone it. That kind of ruins the entire podcast.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
So let's talk just very, very briefly about that. I've been around a lot of police officers over the years that I know drink. I've never been around a police officer that I know that took drugs. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. But I know a lot of police officers that did drink, but I don't know that the drinking had really anything to do with the relationship problems that we saw. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head or anyone that, I knew directly. I knew of instances that probably involved alcohol. Like if you chased your spouse with a police car across your front yard, you probably had a little bit of alcohol in you, maybe, possibly. I mean, that's a true story. It happened. Well, not do names, but that did happen. If you took a radio...
If you chased your spouse around the parking lot at a roll call site while armed.
There you go.
That was probably not drug induced. That was probably alcohol induced.
Probably. I mean, you're obviously making poor decisions if you're on alcohol or drugs. I mean, not everyone. I mean, people could do that without alcohol and drugs too. That's just plain old mad at you and I'm going to try to kill you with a car or hit you with a brick Motorola radio and try to maim you with that too, which that happened.
All right, I want to leave you with a quote that I found in the Harvard Business Review, and you'd be like, "What? How did you get there?
Where are we going here?"
We're wrapping this thing up.
We barely talked about this.
I know, but we're at our limit.
Oh, so we're gonna leave you.
We're gonna leave you
with
hanging.
a cliffhanger of
exactly.
you'll have to listen next week to how this
Next
works
week,
out.
when you tune in, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
That's
No
not
filter.
true. That's
No
not true.
filter.
No.
No lollipops, rainbows, bunny rabbits, and Easter. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll when we get there. But I want to leave you with this quote as we begin to wrap this thing up and walk away. Fascinating thing I found as I was researching this topic and trying to get a little bit more information that we could put into your hands that might be helpful to you was I found a guy that fascinates me because I'd not heard about him until I started looking at this stuff. But this guy is a lieutenant colonel in the United States Reserves, and he works at the United States Military Academy at West Point as an assistant professor in leadership and psychology. There was an article that came out in the Harvard Business Review about 6 reasons why we make bad decisions and what to do about them. And they were written by this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Irwin.
I don't know why I find that funny.
So I'm going to wrap this episode up with one of the quotes that he had there, and then we can expound on this a little bit later down the road. Doesn't have to be in episode 3. It could be episode 12, as far as I know. Because, when you're working with Cindy, sometimes the podcast gets off track and we discuss stuff I didn't even want to talk about. But Mike Irwin said, consistently making good decisions is arguably the most important habit that we can develop, especially at work. This whole episode of this podcast has been talked about is workplace decisions and things that we've seen. Our choices affect our health, our safety, our relationships, how we spend our time, and our overall well-being. I think it's a fair statement.
Absolutely, because when you say that, I think about the fact that I have my work email on my phone, but I don't get notified of emails, and I try not to even be curious about what emails I have in my box over the weekend because I'm not working. I don't need to. And the whole point of that is that if someone sends me an email that ticks me off or causes a reaction, I don't want to ruin my weekend by having that.
Thank you guys very much for your time. Thanks for signing up. Thank you for subscribing to our podcast.
We were all over the place like a Chinese balloon, spy balloon.
Yeah, yes.
We were. We're sorry.
Yes, we were.
I hope you like it, though.
I'm kind of following Cindy's lead because Cindy said last week that there are certain things that she follows that are just kind of unscripted like this. So we're kind of going to go that direction and see whether or not it affects our viewing audience or not. I thought she was going to say we were all over the place because we've gotten listeners from
Charlotte, North Carolina, Indianapolis, Indiana, San Francisco, California, Houston, Texas, Fortville, Indiana. Who the heck is listening in Fortville? Greenfield, Greenwood, and Glenwood, Indiana. We had to look that up on the map to see where that was.
Did we look up Glenwood, Indiana?
I don't think we did, but
we're
going to have to look that up.
Somebody tell us where the hell Glenwood,
and then
Indiana
there's just Missouri. You didn't even tell us what town you're in, so that's awesome.
Well, maybe they were outside looking at the Chinese surveillance balloon.
Well, it could be because it flew right over Missouri.
It did.
It probably flew over us too.
Parts of Missouri too. Yeah, but it was cloudy here yesterday, so we wouldn't have noticed.
You couldn't see with the naked eye.
So hey, I want to do a shout out real quick. This has nothing to do with Cindy, but I want to give a shout out to some of the people that gave us feedback. One is Eric Foley. Eric Foley works at the Christian Center in Anderson. A friend of mine, I met him a couple of months ago when we were discussing podcasts, and Eric is actually responsible for the equipment that we're using in this podcast. He purchased it, we purchased it through Eric. He's also given me some technical advice on how to run this. Marcus Dennis, our friend and pastor, Marcus is about to launch another one of his podcasts here locally. We're pretty excited to be joining him here with that. So we'll be doing some of our podcasting, especially some of the guest podcasting. I think we're going to try to do that in the local studio that we're getting ready to launch. We're not going to tell you where that's at yet because we don't want to steal that thunder from Marcus. I want to give it a shout out to Amy Carnes. Amy is the lady that's a high school lifelong friend of mine that gave us some really positive feedback on this podcast, and it kind of fires us up to keep moving forward. And then a friend of mine who operates a radio station down in Batesville, WRBI Country 103.9, Southern Indiana's first choice. The guy's name's Brent Lee. I met Brent during some campaign work that I did several years ago. And I reached out to Brent and I asked him to pay attention to our podcast, give me some feedback on that. We talked a little bit about that briefly on that Friday when I shared the initial episode with him. So we're kind of looking forward to hearing from him. Let me give you a way that you can give us some podcast feedback. You can send us an email if you're interested in doing that. The email address is apillowaway@gmail.com. Or you can join us on the Facebook fan page that we've set up called A Pillow Away Fan Page. Catchy name, huh? A Pillow Away fan page on Facebook. Feel free to log in there. It's an open page. You can pretty much put up what you want. If we don't like it, we're going to get rid of it. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, tell us what you like and what you don't like, because in order for this to go forward, we don't want to talk about stuff that you don't care about. If you find us boring, I mean, any of those things, we're looking for honest feedback. One of my friends, Kim, thank you for your feedback on the Facebook, and she'll probably be a guest on here. We talked about, music and pop culture and things like that. So, there'll be other things other than
She
relationship
might
talk.
actually be a productive guest on here where you and she have production conversations and I'm just kind of in the room running the machine, right?
Maybe.
Okay, well, that's good. And by the way, Cindy is the reason that your Bengals lost last week. She put the curse on them
That's not true.
just before we signed off
That's
last
not true.
week. So do you have any predictions for the Super Bowl?
Predictions?
Thoughts?
No, I just,
You're not rooting for either one of them?
I don't. I'm
Really
not.
not.
I'm not a huge Chiefs fan,
No.
and you don't even like the Eagles at
I can't
all.
stand the Philadelphia Eagles.
So I would say if I'm leaning towards anything, and this is way like 500 spaces removed, is that my favorite Peloton instructor, who is Jen Sherman, is a huge Eagles fan, has been for years, and so for her, I'll probably be rooting for the Eagles. But that's the only reason, and that's really kind of a crazy reason to
What
do
a
that.
squirrely reason
I know
to
it's
root
squirrely, but
for football.
I don't really. I mean, I'm not a big Chiefs, Mahomes. I like both the Kelseys. I like Kelsey's, the two brothers. I mean,
Yeah, that's a compelling story.
the game itself is always usually
Boring.
most of the time.
Yeah, we're gonna watch it next week for mainly the commercials.
Yeah, we're like. I mean, we love football and we love
Yeah,
the
but
Super
I don't like
Bowl,
anything about
but
either one of these two teams.
but the games. It's hard sometimes when it's not your team and your team sucks. So
Yeah, please, if any of you hear this and you have good standing with our Lord and Savior, please don't let us hire Jeff Saturday.